I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. If you don't redesign leadership, it will redesign you. What do I mean by that? Well, the reality of life, in my experience, that as you develop and progress in your leadership journey and as you move into more and more senior positions, the demands and needs on you change. Therefore, you need to change. It's deluded to think that what initially got you into your first leadership role can survive without amendment or development for you the entirety of your career. You will change. The only question is, are you changing in a way that you are happy about, that you are consciously aware of, or are you changing in a way that you are not consciously aware of, and actually you wake up one day exhausted, cynical, resentful, and wondering, how did I get here? Now, the last episode, if you haven't listened to it, please go back, where we talked about what to do when leadership no longer feels worth it. That question, is it still worth it? Is what this role takes out of me worth what I get in return? Now, that was an interesting topic to put out there, and the feedback has been phenomenal from people reaching out to me personally, reaching out to us, and expressing a resonance with what we talked about, this creep into an environment where it just feels like they are so drained with where they are that they can't quite see the wood for the trees. The tax that they're paying in terms of the emotional drain, the fatigue, the weight as a senior leader is starting to feel too much. Now, obviously, the last thing we want is everybody running for the exit door and saying, I can't do it. Now, that can be an option in some extreme cases, but in reality, you can do it. And as I spoke in the last episode, it's about reframing that question to, what do I need to do for it to be worth it again? And so today is a continuation of that theme. I felt that it was important, having listened to the feedback from the last episode, to help support and guide with some core areas to think about that do allow you to redesign your leadership. As I said at the start of the episode, our roles evolve. Think of your own journey. Irrespective of where you are, how old you are, how senior you are, you will be able to look back at the roles you started out with, how that role evolved, how your level of seniority increased, your level of responsibility. So we can all see, irrespective of where we are on that journey, a clear step of increased load and responsibility. So it's really clearly apparent to all of us when we stop and reflect that the role's changing. But are we changing? And I had a conversation just this week that really brings it to life. A lady that works in the medical sector. Now, she used to be very much in a clinical role on the wards dealing with patients. And she's moved into a managerial role, still with that connection to the clinical team, but her role has evolved. And she surmised this perfectly with an analogy that when somebody cries for help on the ward, a member of staff, everybody runs, because this could have a critical consequence on a patient. And so that takes priority. You stop what you do. When someone cries for help, it's all hands on deck. Now, in this managerial role she's in, she recognizes that even though she might get multiple calls for help on any given day, she can't stop in every circumstance, because not every cry for help is a specific priority that she needs to deal with. Yes, they may need some support, but perhaps that has to be deferred and that has to be booked in for a follow-up meeting or dealt with in due course. So it's back to that notion of an open door policy, really. She was struggling to evolve in her leadership style and have a willingness to say, I can help, but not right now, in order to keep moving through her expanded list of priorities and tasks. The old way of leading had to evolve into a new way of leading. Now, that's very specific to the medical space, but I hope the principle lands with you that it's absolutely right and it's absolutely essential to look at what the role requires and how we evolve. Not least because our own fulfillment rests on it, but also our level of ability to perform over the longer term. If we don't redesign, then we get moved and pushed into something and a way of working that just drains us and it'll either burn us out or lead to us not having that level of fulfillment, in which case we walk away from the role. As I was preparing for this episode, I was reading back through some of the conversations, the comments, the notes I'd taken on those conversations with listeners of the last episode. And certain statements really jump out. I don't recognize myself anymore. How did I get to this point? Really quite impactful when you hear people sharing that authentic insight into how they're feeling. Now, this is people who are in high pressure roles and ostensibly looking at them, they're performing very well. But internally, there's that gnawing discomfort that I've not allowed myself to evolve and redesign my style as a leader. And that is gnawing at my ability to genuinely feel fulfillment. So I wanted to cover 4 areas now that if I was sitting with you one-to-one, these would be the prompts, these would be the areas that I would be encouraging you to reflect upon to allow you to redesign how you are operating and to reflect on in the future, each and every time your role changes, you're promoted, you move into a more senior position. Because I think these are the prompts, the filters, if you will, that will allow you to evolve in a way that retains that fulfillment and retains that level of performance. So the first area to reflect on is decision load. It stands to reason as you move up the hierarchy of leadership, you're going to have more decisions, and those decisions will have a higher level of weighting, consequence, a ripple effect through the organization. You have to be able to reflect on what are the decisions you should be involved in and what are the decisions you shouldn't. And often when someone's been promoted, they sort of take that status quo, that default setting, well, I've always done this, and then they bolt on top of that the new suite of decisions and the new areas of responsibility that is required in the new role. Well, in effect, you start to straddle 2 roles, and that has so many negative consequences. One, you're overloading yourselves with decisions. You're draining. You can't give the bandwidth to the decisions that really matter because you're swamped with them. Secondly, you are disempowering the person that stepped into your role behind you. As you've been promoted, somebody will have been promoted into your role. And if you keep a tight handle, an expectation that you're going to keep making multiple decisions in that area, well, where's their autonomy? Where's their chance to make an impact? You wouldn't like it if the role you'd stepped into, the predecessor was still making decisions for you or with you or suggesting what you should and shouldn't do. So the first and most obvious area to reflect on is, what decisions am I still making out of habit? And where am I becoming the bottleneck? Because when you fail to delegate effectively, when you keep trying to have a foot in both camps, as I've just illustrated, you slow everything down because your team, your colleagues, your direct reports, the people that have stepped into the role behind you, they all have an ability. They can make decisions and move forward. If you are demanding an involvement in those decisions, they have to wait until they have an audience with you. So not only is it draining you and draining them from a mental perspective and an energy perspective, but it's also slowing the performance of the team down. So reduce that decision load and focus in on the areas that your role requires you to be in. And every time that role changes, evolves, you get promoted, reflect on it again. What do you need to let go of? What do you need to remain focused on? The second area of focus is energy strategy. We all know energy is not infinite. We need to protect it. We need to manage it. We need to have strategies that allow us to recover and restore energy so we can bring the best of ourselves to our role. I've covered this in so many different ways in the back catalogue of the podcast, but the old-fashioned, old-school attitude is you will keep moving forward. You will crash through barrier and adversity. You will relentlessly keep your foot to the floor. And that is resilience. That is work ethic. And it's so deluded. I've been there. I was there in the early years of my tenure as a CEO. We have to protect our energy. Otherwise, eventually, it's like the slow puncture. It might not be debilitating in the short term, but eventually we've got the flat tire and we can no longer function optimally. So we need to be asking the question, what is draining my energy? It may be tasks, it may be people, it can be a multitude of things. But first and foremost, we need awareness of what is draining my energy disproportionately and what am I going to do about it? There are some people you cannot avoid working with, but there are some people you can distance yourself from. You can address certain difficult conversations so that you put a stop to the energy drain. If somebody's underperforming and you don't deal with it, you don't hold them to a standard, you don't have that difficult conversation, then that may feel easier in the short term, but I guarantee in the medium to longer term, this is one of the classic ways to disproportionately drain your energy. So what are you going to do about it? You have to have the framework to step into those difficult conversations. This is one of the things that comes up with every single client I work with. If we confront the difficult conversations, we can deal with underperformance and where people are falling short of standards, everything lifts. We protect our energy, and then as a consequence, we also enhance the energy of everyone around us because it drains everybody to see underperformance and it drains all of your team to see underperformance not being addressed because the question starts to develop, well, if they're not doing it, why am I working so hard when they can do the bare minimum and not be held to account? So energy management, both for you personally and the wider team, so important. And we have to keep asking that question every time we move up and through the ranks. What is draining my energy disproportionately? Another classic example is a skill or knowledge gap. We worry because we've moved up. I don't really understand this area and I feel like a bit of an imposter. Well, I'll just try and shy away from that and I hope nobody ever asks me. Well, that's a surefire way to just exacerbate that slow puncher, to make it even worse. Because I guarantee at some point somewhere, particularly in a high pressure situation, your need for knowledge or skill in that area will be brought to the fore. And if you're found wanting, that is just going to exacerbate that energy depletion even further. So don't hide from those gaps. Embrace them, identify them, build a plan, and step into them. Another core area of my coaching and mentoring is working with clients to say, so what are we going to do about this? Who can help you close that skill gap? Who can help you close that knowledge gap? Is it somebody internally to your organization? Is it somebody externally? Is there a course or training program we need to do? But let's seal that puncher, put that slow puncher away. Let's have it fixed. Let's not live in fear of a skill or knowledge gap being exposed. Close the gap so there's nothing to expose. And I guarantee there is nothing wrong with this. Every time you move up in levels of seniority into a new role, guess what? Another gap will appear. Another knowledge gap, another skills gap. That does not mean you're an imposter. It means you are stepping into new, uncomfortable environments. And so you have to take action to become comfortable. You have to take action to learn more, speak to the right people, and know that every time I move forward and move up on my career journey, this situation will keep arising. So don't ignore it, step into it, and come up with a roadmap to fix it. The third area is a difficult one to navigate, and that's emotional ownership. You are accountable for everything as a leader, but we have to work really hard not to absorb the emotion of every situation. Now, that's not saying we have to become a robot. Some of us are far more empathetic and far more connected with our people than others. That is part of who we are. That is part of how we operate. I would like to think I was always very focused on my people and their well-being during my 10 years as a CEO. But this point really resonates with me. You are going to deal with difficult situations. You are going to deal with difficult conversations. They all have an emotional residue. And if you absorb it all, it becomes really difficult to continue to do your job. So very cautious in how I articulate this because I'm not saying that you should lose your empathy. I'm not saying you should lose your understanding, but we have to develop the strategies that help us process the stress and particularly the emotional elements of some of the things we deal with. And there are a myriad of ways that we can do that. Movement, physical exercise being one of the predominant. We have to take some of that stress that we naturally absorb and release it from our body so that it doesn't do us a disservice. Equally, we need to focus in on the controllables in the situation. However difficult or upsetting something may be, rather than getting stuck in the emotional impact of that, we have to think, right, what can I or anyone else in the organization do to help fix this? What support can we give? How do we focus in on the controllables, take action to try and overcome this situation? Easier said than done. As I say, I'm very careful in how I articulate this, but the harsh reality is the more senior you become, the more things you will be involved in. As we said earlier, there's much bigger weight in your decisions, and that has an emotional impact, particularly when you're making decisions that might affect people's livelihood. That has a natural emotional sting that makes it very, very difficult not to absorb some of that. But there are strategies and ways to help us to be able to do that. And again, it's a major focus of the work I do coaching and mentoring clients. And the fourth area I get people to reflect on is, what is your identity beyond your role? Having had a sporting background, I'm very aware of the challenges that sportsmen and women have when their elite sporting chapter finishes. Who are they now? What do they do? They've become very much one with their sporting role. And this is more common than you might think within leadership, particularly as we move up through the ranks and move into those senior positions. We just become fused as one with our role. We are our role is us, and that is our whole identity. And that's not particularly healthy for a whole raft of reasons. So one of the areas I want you to reflect on is, who am I beyond my role? What do I stand for? What are my values? And again, I keep saying this because I'm not going to be able to unpack all of this in one short podcast episode, but these are the areas that I dive most deeply into with clients to help them design leadership in a way that serves them rather than their role design everything for them. So understanding that your role is a core part of who you are and what you do, understandably, but it is not all of you. It is not all that you do. And so questions such as, well, who am I when I'm not at work? Who am I when I'm not in my professional role? As I say, they're all very nuanced, these questions, but I want you to think of them as a suite of questions, a suite of areas of focus. Let's look at that decision load. What am I involved in that I don't need to be in? How do we protect energy, disconnect from some of the things that are disproportionately draining you? How do we protect ourselves from the undoubted absorption of emotions as a consequence of the myriad of big, high-pressure, difficult decisions we're going to make? And how do we keep a sense of, for want of a better word, perspective, that our role is a core and truly important part of who we are and what we do, but it is not all of us. And so that management of identity is the fourth core area that I want you to be able to reflect on. As I wrap this episode up, I'm drawn back into that notion of high performance. I aspire to help everybody I work with create the highest level of performance, but to do it sustainably so that you can be a truly high performing individual in all aspects of your life over the long term. As I've said in previous episodes, we can put our proverbial foot to the floor on the accelerator, we can push ourselves really hard, disregard everything I've talked about today, and create a level of performance. But eventually we come crashing down again. It's not physically or mentally sustainable, and it's certainly not going to give us that long-term ability to strategically move through the pressures of senior leadership in a way that we retain our fulfillment. So this isn't a radical overhaul. It's about looking at what truly matters. Each time you take a step forward into a more senior role, you look back through these four core areas, and it allows you to reset, to tweak, not throw everything out and start again, but you will retain core elements and you will remove elements. Just in a practical sense, it's so easy to envisage that. Well, certain areas I'm now delegating, certain areas I don't touch at all, certain areas I'll remain connected to, but not as much. And I'm moving into new areas and I need focus for that. So the evolution of the role is very clear to see. Our job descriptions evolve. It's clear in black and white on paper. This is the more subjective, less tangible elements of you as a leader and your style, what changes around that evolving leadership role. So I hope, as I always say, that these prompts, these areas will lead to questions. They will lead to answers. They will lead to you being able to say, I can see, I can feel things that I can change here. There are some steps I can take so that we retain that fulfillment. And going back to the previous episode I mentioned at the start of this episode, we're not finding ourselves repeatedly asking that question, is this still worth it? That question doesn't need answering because we know in our core and in our heart, I'm loving what I'm doing. I'm fulfilled. I'm enjoying it. Yes, it is worth it. And we just keep reflecting and redesigning as we grow and as our role grows. And once you get that right, you become a much better leader because you then start to embrace that with the people that you lead. You're encouraging them to do the same exercise, to look at their decision load, to look at how they remove some of that emotional absorption, to look at all the things we've talked about today so that they are better in their role. And that's how we go beyond just you as a high-performing individual. We start to build high-performing teams and environments where nobody wants to leave and everybody wants to be a part of it. And we build some fabulous performance outcomes and retain a highly fulfilled, highly motivated workforce as a consequence. The questions are coming in thick and fast. I try and read everyone. I try and get back on everyone. Please do that. Let that feedback keep coming back in. Today's episode, once again, was born out of the resonance of the last one with so many people saying, that's me. I'm in a senior role. I'm a bit embarrassed almost saying it, but I'm feeling frustrated. I'm wondering if it's still worth it. If people were to hear me say that, they'd say I was ungrateful. I'm well paid. I'm in a great organization, but the tax, the emotional cost of it is becoming too much. So having listened to that feedback, I wanted today to build and give people who perhaps thought those same things, but didn't actually reach out and ask for further guidance. Well, hopefully today is a tool to let you do that. So as I always say, keep sharing the feedback. Please do like and rate this podcast. It makes a huge difference to the algorithms. It allows us to reach more and more people. Share it with anybody that you think the content will resonate with, because it's all designed to help people enjoy their leadership journey and find that higher level of fulfillment in all aspects of their professional role and indeed personal lives. So I wish you the very best of luck on your leadership journey, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.